When discussing addiction, the focus is often placed on the substance itself. Alcohol, drugs, or other addictive behaviors are treated as the primary problem, as if the substance alone were responsible for a person's decline. In reality, substances are rarely the root cause. They are responses, attempts by the brain to cope with internal distress. To understand why someone chooses alcohol specifically, we must first understand how the brain experiences stress, meaning, and emotional pain. Poor psychological well-being is not simply the result of difficult circumstances. It is the brain's response to external stimuli as interpreted through personal beliefs, past experiences, and internal narratives. Two people can face the same situation and respond very differently, not because one is stronger or weaker, but because their brains assign different meanings to what is happening. When reality aligns with deeply held beliefs, the nervous system remains relatively calm. When reality contradicts those beliefs, the brain may interpret the situation as threatening, leading to stress. Stress, in this sense, is not just pressure or discomfort. It is a biological state in which the brain perceives danger, whether physical, emotional, or social. If this stress becomes intense or prolonged and exceeds a person's capacity to regulate it, the nervous system moves into a protective mode. The brain's primary evolutionary function is not happiness or fulfillment, but survival. When overwhelmed, it prioritizes immediate relief over long-term consequences. To protect the organism from excessive stress, the brain can respond in many ways. These include emotional numbing, avoidance, dissociation, compulsive behaviors, or the use of substances that reduce emotional intensity. Alcohol is particularly effective in this regard. It depresses the central nervous system, dampens anxiety, reduces self-awareness, and temporarily silences internal tension. For a brain under constant stress, alcohol can feel like relief. In Western societies, alcohol occupies a unique position. It is legal, widely available, and socially accepted. It is embedded in cultural rituals, celebrations, social gatherings, relaxation after work, and is often portrayed as a normal way to unwind or cope. Unlike many other substances, alcohol does not immediately mark someone as deviant or problematic. For someone searching, often unconsciously, for a way to ease inner distress, alcohol is frequently the first and most accessible option. The crucial moment occurs when the brain first registers that alcohol has reduced emotional pain. This learning process happens automatically and largely outside conscious awareness. The brain's dopamine system, part of the so-called reptilian or survival-oriented brain, records the association between the substance and relief. Dopamine is often misunderstood as a pleasure chemical, but its primary function is learning and motivation. It tells the brain, "This works, remember this." Once that association is formed, alcohol becomes a kind of psychological first aid. The next time stress, fear, shame, or emotional overload arises, the brain recalls the previous solution. Importantly, this is not a rational decision-making process. The brain does not weigh pros and cons or consider future harm. It simply reaches for what previously restored balance the fastest. Over time, this creates a repeating pattern. Stress triggers discomfort, alcohol provides rapid relief, and the brain reinforces the behavior. Because this process is driven by deep, automatic neural circuits, it often feels compulsive rather than chosen. Many people struggling with alcohol use describe not wanting to drink, yet feeling an overwhelming urge to do so. This is not a failure of willpower, it is the result of a nervous system that has learned to rely on alcohol for regulation. The speed at which this pattern develops depends on several factors. One key factor is a person's ability, or inability, to solve problems and regulate emotions in healthy ways. If someone has never learned how to process difficult emotions, communicate needs, set boundaries, or tolerate distress, their internal stress levels are likely to remain high. In such cases, alcohol becomes not a luxury but a necessity, a tool for survival rather than enjoyment. As this cycle repeats, the brain adapts. The same amount of alcohol produces less relief, leading to increased consumption. What began as a coping strategy gradually turns into a habit, and eventually into dependence. At this stage, alcohol no longer simply relieves stress, it becomes required for the nervous system to function at all. Without it, anxiety, irritability, and emotional pain intensify, reinforcing the cycle further. Genetic vulnerability also plays a significant role. A family history of alcoholism increases the likelihood of developing dependence, not because addiction is inevitable, but because the brain may be more sensitive to alcohol's effects. Additionally, growing up in an environment where alcohol misuse is present can shape beliefs about coping, emotions, and stress. These beliefs, often formed early and unconsciously, become the lens through which reality is interpreted. Personal belief systems are especially powerful. Beliefs about one's own worth, safety, control, and capacity to handle life strongly influence stress responses. If these beliefs are shaped by fear, shame, or chronic insecurity, the brain remains on high alert. Alcohol, in this context, does not merely numb feelings, it temporarily quiets a nervous system that has never learned to feel safe. When no one teaches a person how to deal with problems, emotions, or internal conflict, and when fear and distorted beliefs dominate their inner world, alcohol can quickly take on a central role. For some, this process unfolds rapidly. Within just a few years, what started as an attempt to cope can become a severe addiction. This progression is not a sign of moral weakness or personal failure, but of a brain doing the best it can with the tools it has. Understanding why someone chooses alcohol over other substances requires compassion and depth. Alcohol is not chosen because it is inherently desirable, but because it works, at least temporarily. Recovery, therefore, cannot focus solely on removing the substance. It must involve teaching the brain new ways to regulate stress, process emotions, and reinterpret reality. Only when the original function of alcohol is replaced does its grip truly loosen. In this sense, addiction is not the problem itself, but a signal. It points to unmet needs, unlearned skills, and a nervous system that has been trying to survive in the only way it knew how.